Yeah, I have a PPT, PowerPoint presentation, and it's very long. So whenever you want me to stop, you can just give me 5 minutes notice
Sure.
because I am usually limited time. So this actually we have been discussing since COP26 is now on the annual in Glasgow. Uh, I've been following that, and I thought we need to discuss these issues in relation with India, because as in the beginning we were discussing, India made a fresh commitment at COP26 in addition to what was committed in Paris Agreement, COP21. Uh, so I'll just go, this is a layout, and in between I'll be doing a lot of linkages because I'm coming from international to national and local. So I'll be looking at the linkages in between all this. So this is a layout broadly. So why carbonization and energy sources, and then the way out is decarbonization, and even in within decarbonization, what are the steps which are required. I think this is a fresh, latest carbon budget which was released. The report was released 2 days before at COP26. So this, of course, there are several reports on carbon, including International Energy Agency. They also released a report just 15, 20 days back. So I'm not going to review all those things. And of course, depending on the report you're looking at, some data will be here and there changes. So this carbon budget, they have been monitoring for long. So they are saying this year that, unlike last year, because of Corona, there was a decrease in carbon emissions because all over the world there has been lockdown, shutdowns, and people had to stay indoors. So industrial production suffered, even transport was limited. So overall, there was a reduction, but now it is picking up. So it is going to 2019 levels. So that's what they are saying. So that means we are reaching again the business as usual scenario, and probably much more as well. Second, they are saying carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. I think that has decreased in 23 countries in this decade, 2010 to 2019. That means some countries are taking action on fossil fuel burning. So, fuels or any of them, unless we go into detail, we will not be able to understand it better. And principally, I think this is what we need to realize. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing, and it is set to reach 414,000 ppm in 2021. So this year, it's 49% above pre-industrial levels. So even if you are now taking steps to reduce your emissions, the concentration is increasing because of the historical and then the current rate of addition. So I think this is the cause of concern. I think most of you understand carbon dioxide in atmosphere means it increases the scope for global warming. So right now the concern is to limit that global warming, which is set to rise below 2 degrees, and at best they want to limit it to 1.5 degrees. But then various studies, keep informing us that because lack of action is there, it might go to 2.7 degrees. So, but 1.5 degrees itself, we are seeing disasters happening all over the world. So you have forest fires in Siberia, California, and even Australia, huge forest fires, not just smaller ones, even in Indonesia. And then you have unusual rains, flood, that environmental destruction coupled with global warming. I think that we are seeing everywhere. In India, we are seeing Kerala repeatedly facing floods. In Telangana, which is a water shortage area, we are seeing floods. So in Warangal, Karimnagar, in Hyderabad, where they never expected water, now there are floods. So I think all this cumulatively, the disaster, the speed of the disaster, the time gap between disasters, I think is reducing. So that's again linked with carbon dioxide in atmosphere. So what is that? Just to understand what is happening, it's not just carbon dioxide. So you can see this figure where it is, this is 1990 level. I think that's taken. So that itself is a problem. It raises to 1 degree, and then we are going beyond that. And it's not just carbon dioxide, it is methane is also increasing. You can see nitrous oxides from 1980 to 2015, and even other gases. So the only CFC gases are controlled because the technology has been brought in. So non-CFC chlorofluorocarbons are being used increasingly in the last 10-15 years. So what the alarming thing is the carbon dioxide, and then methane levels are increasing. So this is again 3-year-old data, which again shows us that atmospheric carbon dioxide is increasing. So right from 1955 to 2015, you can see it is steadily increasing. And this arc is what people want to reduce, but then it's not happening. So this is old data. You can see this June 2018, they are saying 410 ppm. But here, this latest 2021 budget says 414.7 ppm. It looks marginal, but the impact will be very high, and carbon in atmosphere is the biggest threat. Now there are funny statements coming, even in COP26. So someone was saying by 2050 we'll make carbon dioxide in atmosphere zero. Basically, we need some carbon dioxide in atmosphere. It's not that it has to be zero, but people have their own responses. So this biggest threat we need to understand how it happened, what is who are behind us, because when you are taking mitigation or reducing emissions, I think we need to see where the problem is. So everyone is not doing the same. So you can see here, the data shows that carbon emissions in 2013 are highest in China, followed by US and followed by India. So India is emerging as a significant contributor of carbon emissions, even though we were late. The earliest and biggest emitters are all these developed nations. But then recently in COP26, Prime Minister said, even though our population is 17% of the world, our carbon contribution to the world carbon emissions is a mere 5%. In fact, it has gone up to 7% in 2021. So, but it's not mere, when you look at the world, 200 odd nations, 5% for one country is still a significant, or even 7% is very significant. Now coming to which are the sectors, this is again a 2018 data. Now they are saying a little percentage changes are there, but these are the principal sectors where carbon emission is happening. Electricity and heat production is 25%. So when we are saying electricity production, mostly it is a coal-based thermal power production, and even other sources are also contributing. Then agriculture, forestry, and other land use 24%. Buildings 6%, transportation 14%, industry 21%. Now this is again contested by different reports, and then it is also varied in each country. This is a global scenario. And agriculture, it surprises us that agriculture is also a net contributor of carbon emissions. But then it's largely comes from a few countries and not necessarily from India, because in India, paddy is blamed for contributing to methane emissions, not carbon dioxide. So here, I'm taking one example of US. As I said, each nation has its own, mix of emission contribution. So here you can see transportation is very high, followed by electricity production and industry. So agriculture is 10%, commercial and residential is 13%. Now this is again, within US, each state, again, the mix is different. So I think wherever industrial agriculture, even, this meat production plants are there at Tyson, I think in Atlanta or in some other states, agriculture contribution is higher and other sources are lower. This again, contribution changes as per income, as per, there are various other factors involved. So this, I think, again, we need to take the major sectors which are contributing. So when you are saying transportation, again, we need to break down into the sources: road transport, truck, then aviation, so trains, so different kinds of sources. So here is another kind of report, just to give us a brief idea how it is going from 1990 to 2014. So here you can see transport picking up and then a little decrease in the emissions. Electricity generation, again, it's the same case from 2010. You can see a slight bend. But there is growth in agriculture, then commercial growth is there, residential growth is there. So in fact, for us to understand in India, I think we need to generate such kind of data, but it's not happening on par with what is happening at an international level. The Energy Research Institute, TERI, World Resources Institute, they have developed some reports on India, but still the debate is there, how authentic the data is there. Because in India, a lot of the data always there. Now, this is again the latest report, 2020. You can see the World Resources Institute and Climate Watch. So they have looked at all the contributing factors to global greenhouse gas emission. So this energy, when they're saying energy, it's not just electricity, it's complete energy, all burning fossil fuels, diesel burning, petrol burning, wood. So everything comes in. So this is, of course, they looked at in manufacturing, iron and steel contribution is very high. Chemical and petrochemicals are also a significant contributor. Road transport, as I mentioned, within transport, road transport is very high in comparison with aviation or shipping. Overall, this is a global. And even residential, commercial buildings. So residential is very high and commercial is a little lesser. So here you can see cement, chemicals, wastewater treatment plants, landfills, like what we have in Telangana, Hyderabad, Jawahar Nagar dump. So they produce methane. So landfills, wherever they are, even in Gazipur near Delhi, or Bombay, I think there is one near Kolaba, very huge mountains. So they continuously produce methane. And of course, deforestation has its own contribution. Then crop burning. After crop is harvested, a crop is being burned. We in Indian traditional agriculture, we never used to burn, but with machinery, I think farmers are finding it better to burn it, economically rather than mulching and other practices. So rice cultivation is also identified as one of the major contributors of methane. And of course, soil livestock. Livestock is again a big contributor of methane emissions, especially cows, because they continuously belch, so they give out gas. So methane emissions from livestock, pigs, poultry, all this manure. So these are all sources which have been identified in terms of percentages as well. So it's another way of looking at this is 2010 data, not a recent one. So again, each sector wise how it is increasing. So there are direct emissions, there are indirect emissions. I think we need to understand some are direct and some are indirect emissions. So here we'll just take a pause and look at where this, this is fossil fuel consumption in the last 25 years, that is between 1988 and 2013. So here you can see global gas consumption has been increasing. Now, most of us think natural gas is a very neat gas, but it's still methane. So methane contributes a lot to emissions as well. Then you have coal consumption. This is again, you can see how it has increased tremendously. And of course, global oil consumption is simply increasing. So overall, because of all these three major sources of energy and electricity for various sectors, you can see the carbon concentration in the atmosphere has been increasing tremendously. So now the right now discussions even in COP is they want to reduce on all the fossil fuels, but on Monday, last Monday, there was this deal declared that coal consumption will be reduced or completely ended. So one of the declarations, commitments given by all the countries is they will not invest any money in overseas coal plants. So coal consumption, whatever projects are there, X country will not invest in other countries. So China, which is the biggest investor in Africa and Asia, they have taken a decision almost 6 months earlier to COP26. Now, most other nations have also joined this commitment. So that means new investments are going to be reduced. So now it will be on individual nations to produce their own investment on coal consumption. But again, they themselves, each of them have given targets for the next 2030, 2040 and 2050. So I'm not going into those details. But here you can see in terms of energy consumption, which are the highest countries. So here you can see China, which is leading with the 21 point. The world is 46.6. So this is again, no, it depends on the source. But overall, these are the major consuming countries of energy. Now, this is about China. So China's fossil fuel consumption, you can see it suddenly increased from 2001, 2003. So just before World Trade Organization started operating free trade, that was in 2004-5. Since then, the trade has increased, and with the trade, Chinese fossil fuel consumption has increased tremendously, suddenly. So you can see coal consumption has gone up steeply in China, followed by oil and then gas. But now they are trying to reduce that. This is again, globally transportation. So within transport, we have seen transport is a significant contributor of carbon dioxide emissions. But here within transportation, you can see how road transport continues to grow. That means your cars, your trucks, I think they are burning a lot of petroleum sources, and that is increasing over years. And then followed by rail. Of course, if you reduce, look at it at per capita basis, its contribution is not a major contribution. Shipping also is reasonably growing, but road transport is a concern. So when we are discussing solutions, actually we'll come to that later, but I thought I'll mention it here. In COP26, there are this option of electrical vehicles. Now, electrical vehicles will reduce point sources of emission, like each vehicle, a petrol vehicle will contribute carbon dioxide emissions, and electrical vehicle will reduce that emissions at that point where the vehicle is located. But then to supply electricity, some other energy source is used somewhere else. So if it is coal, then maybe the contamination is reduced here, but it happens elsewhere. So whenever we are discussing these solutions, I think we have to look at the other aspects as well and take a decision on a limited set of parameters. So, yeah, this is Indian energy production by fuel plus consumption. So this black line is consumption, which is growing and which has increased steeply after 2005. So I think it is growing simply. And coals, so you can see our coal dependence is increasing. So oil, is not as much as coal. You can see this oil. Then tidal power. Hydro means tidal power. It is increasing, but not on par with coal. Nuclear has always been under 2% or 3%. Always, they've been saying 10%. Of course, nuclear is not at all a solution. In fact, recent discussions, in fact, this year in Europe, where they phased out some of the coal plants and nuclear plants have been phased out long back in Germany. France is also reducing their dependence on nuclear. US has stopped new nuclear power plants in 1980. So they are not adding any new capacities on nuclear. So their base load is was dependent on coal, and that coal is being reduced. So recent, analysis is trying to bring a fear processing. This winter is going to be very harsh in Europe because electricity shortages because the source is unstable. So they are blaming solar where, like Germany, I think almost 90% is coming from solar, and they are blaming Germany for adopting, depending only on solar, and the base load is not coming from coal. So there are is being pushed through. Ultimately, people like Bill Gates or other big investors, they are saying nuclear is the answer. Nuclear is the most expensive, and not only in terms of economic cost, but also in terms of environmental impact, is the most expensive. It did not pick up in the last 40 years simply because of these factors. So if we are today talking nuclear as an option, we are only ignoring those costs which we know already. Now, in terms of usage, I'm just now shifting to energy consumption where it happens. So in India, we are talking of built environment. So we are building mega cities, we are building concrete structures. So this built environment is leading to increase in energy consumption. So are we trying to look at cleaner fuels for how we need to look at? So increase the higher access to cleaner fuels. I mean, that's a way out. That's a sustainable pathway. Then it's not just it's shifting from coal to solar. It's also about building design. How you use the environment so that you reduce your energy intensity. So this ECBC, environment energy conservation building code, ECBC, it talks about design as well, not just and then the construction practices, materials used. So in a tropical country like India, where sun shines through 365 days, using glass as a facade, before the buildings or inside buildings, increases energy conservation. So when you're designing, I think these aspects need to be looked into. So in Hyderabad, you see in Madhapur, Kondapur, and various other places, the multi-storied buildings using glass. So glass is actually an option for cold countries where their sunshine period is very less because they want more heat to come naturally. We get heat, without asking for it, and now we need to shield ourselves, protect ourselves from that heat. So increasing air conditioning, just because you use the glass and then just because we thought concretization, I think so we are now setting wrong priorities in built environment. So that's where building design, construction practices are very, very important. Allowing natural wind to cool the structures. I think those are the principles which we need to bring in. So that's where energy conservation means not just reducing per unit efficiency, but also how you can avoid artificial energy usage. Now, this is where I bring into level of urbanization. So you can see again that this brings us the inequality in energy usage. So only in states like Maharashtra and a little higher in this is a old map. So in Telangana, Karnataka, Bangalore, so wherever mega cities are there, urbanization is increasing. Of course, all over India, but the pace of urbanization is different. So this urbanization is defining built environment, and this built environment is increasing energy consumption. So I think when you want to work on how to reduce emissions, it's not just about reducing coal. It is also about changing some of the urbanization trends. I think that we need to understand clearly. So here, I just thought, will you look at within where the growth is. So you can see residential, huge growth in residential construction from 2012 to 2020. And then retail is there, commercial office is also increasing, hotels, healthcare, education. But the biggest chunk is in residential space. Now, if you look at again, many of these cities like Trivandrum, Bangalore, even Hyderabad, Bombay, a lot of construction is done and they are empty. There are many empty shells all over these cities. Well, just because, because of economics, because of investment patterns, a lot of investment goes into this construction, but usage is not on par. And in fact, you can go and see in China where they built unnecessarily and they had to abandon entire streets and cities and villages which are concretized, urbanized. So we are also in that trend. So that means our economic model, I think we need to change that and see how we can reduce this unnecessary construction, which again in turn builds demand for energy and then contributes to carbon emissions. Like a construction sector, you see 5% of the share, in this growth rate is contributed by steel industry, paint industry, glass industry. So all these together are also net users of energy. So whenever we are talking of construction sector, we also need to look at those subsectors which themselves are also contributing to this climate change emissions. And, very ironically, government of India is, saying we'll increase compounded annual growth rate. CAGR is a compounded annual growth rate in each of these industries. When you look at the plans on board, every sector they want to grow. And when you want them to grow, whether they are growing in tune with the climate change objectives or, despite that, I think that we need to look at. So adding cement capacity on a par with 80 to 100 metric tons per annum, I think it has its own impact on environment and climate change. I'm coming to electricity consumption, because we are fueling, different economic sectors. Electricity consumption is growing. So you can see building sector consumption is 30%. Residential buildings is 72%. Fans and lighting is 60% among these sectors. And then heating and cooling appliances. In developed nations where cold conditions are there, they use heating. And we use a lot of cooling because we are tropical, countries. So once the global temperatures increase, I think there is more demand for cooling appliances. In fact, in Telangana and look at Hyderabad, last 2-3 years, we used to have some variance in seasonal usage of electricity. So whenever there is a rain, sudden drop in the electricity demand is there, and then next day we used to see as the temperature increases, ambient temperature increases, the usage of electricity increases. So this sudden drop, sudden demand, I think this is also is influencing the electricity fuel choices. So that I think we need to remember whenever we are discussing, sources of electricity production. Now this is buildings. Buildings again. This is about water and other kinds of impacts on energy and climate change. So buildings also apartments. Average apartment has 10 times more energy. Waste per day waste is more from an average apartment rather than independent house. There are number of studies which show that. So a apartment contributes more to wastage rather than a rural house. So in comparison, because of plastic wastage, debris, many other kinds of waste. Similarly, water we are seeing buildings contributing a lot of to the wastewater, even in and then they use fresh water at a very high level. So overall, a building, when you are talking of a building, its impact on environment has various dimensions, and not only in terms of carbon emissions directly and indirectly. So there are many other modes of wastage, emissions, and impacts on environment. So that's why, in the last 10, 15 years, India and even Telangana has this process of approving tall buildings. There will be an environment impact assessment of tall buildings. Only that assessment is done properly, there will be approval for such buildings. Of course, in our system, they made it a routine approval system, but there is a process of impact assessment. So you can look into many of the current tall buildings and what impact they are making on the local environment. Skyscrapers, again, demand, and all of us are happy looking at tall buildings, and we are very happy that it is like a Boston skyline or Washington. So people keep putting comments in the social media saying, "Oh, India is Hyderabad has become Boston or London or whatever name they say, Dallas." So they show this building, but then at what cost? I think that we need to understand, and usually that's not done. So the continuous emissions, continuous energy consumption, and continuous contribution to air pollution, I think all this need to be factored into whenever we are getting admiring or whenever we are, critiquing skyscrapers. So overall, I know just to give you a glimpse, when we are talking of cost, tall buildings, one is the cost where energy, maintenance, resource, you say natural resource, you say water, soil, land, and then the wastage. So this is a cyclical process. So it's not a one-time capital cost we are talking about. It is a continuous, as long as the tall building exists, these impacts will be continuously happening. So energy is a very significant contributor here. So tall buildings create energy demand, and energy demand means we have to find a source for such energy, and that means more carbon emissions. So single building, and then this carrying capacity. One we need to understand. Okay, one building maybe it has its own impact, but it may not be beyond the carrying capacity of that area. But in a same as one place, if you take a 10 square kilometer area, suddenly if you have 100 tall buildings, the impact multiplies. So that's what in environment we talk to as a carrying capacity. So the local environment carrying capacity has to be looked into. Usually EIS look at environment impact assessment. They look at only single building and say, oh, it's not much, and we can give approval. But there is already a 10 skyscrapers or tall buildings in that area. So cumulative impact is something more we need to understand. That's why the carrying capacity as a assessment factor, we need to understand clearly. So public policy, when we are talking of public policy, I'm just giving you an example where, poor people's housing is on one side, and the other side, You are looking at tall buildings, middle class, rich class people, and their carbon contribution, the infrastructure cost for such a tall building, and then the subsidies, public subsidies flow into such tall buildings as well. So on the other hand, you find poor people not able to find place, land for construction. They don't have resources for construction. Cement becomes expensive, sand becomes expensive, and they don't get institutional loans. They have to go for private loans. So cumulatively, when you are balancing, checking what's happening, multitudes of millions, they don't have housing. But on the other hand, you have only 100, rich 1% or richest 10% are taking all the resources. So this is another aspect which should have been considered in public policy. So if your planning is good, as the planning is better, emissions will reduce. But if your planning is low, emissions increase. So I think this linkage is another aspect which we need to understand. Now I'll take a second sector, agriculture. In agriculture also there are emissions. So, and this is happening because of modern irrigation systems, green revolution technologies, hybrid seeds, pesticides, insecticides, chemical fertilizers. And then we are talking of green, white, pink, and blue revolutions. So for people who don't know, white revolution means milk. So huge milk is available. If you compare 1950s to 2021, Indian milk production has gone up 10 times. But then when you look at how much milk is available at village or at a poor man's home, it's absolutely expensive. They can't buy it. So today, 80 rupees is a per liter milk, but not many people can't afford. So once the production is increasing at some cost on the resources, on the other hand, inaccessibility is also increasing. So when we are talking of technologies, when you're talking of emissions, when you're talking of environment, we need to see what is the technology we are using there. So solutions which are talked about right now in agriculture is agroecology, agroforestry, green mulching, where you know the crop residues are mulched into the soil, so soil gets enriched. Natural farming is there, biodiversity is enhanced, so that crop harvests become much more nutrient and also yields increase. So small is beautiful is the overall concept which is coming in agriculture. But just today I did a synthesis of COP26, because yesterday there were a few deals which were signed, and these deals are talking about taking agriculture towards industrial agriculture. What is happening in US, France, Germany, and those people are rejecting, and they want to reduce the overall carbon impact on atmosphere because of their agricultural practices. But India has a much more leeway in opting for these solutions which are sustainable and which are also enabling equity in access to food and also equity in access to resources. So I'll answer if there are any questions, because I think I'm reaching my time. In terms of growth, overall, what we need to look at, this is just a simple representative diagram. So when resource consumption is very high, so we need to look at how natural resources are consumed, how efficiency can be brought into that. And in terms of equity, usually subsidies upfront looks like they are going to poor people, but overall most subsidies go to rich people and the influential people. economics, there is a whole lot of economics on subsidies and how this also increases corruption in the system. In terms of infrastructure, road infrastructure, right from roads or, all kinds of infrastructure. There is an exponential increase only because we are talking of centralized development, centralized planning. So that's why overall we need to do better planning so that growth is sustained and also we have a sustainable development. So these are the aspects which again are very, very crucial whenever we are looking at climate change and impacts on carbon emissions. So this is my, I think my just penultimate slide. So when you're coming to Hyderabad, I think most of you are in Hyderabad. Of course, whatever is happening in Hyderabad is happening elsewhere. So you can see growth, HMDA, Hyderabad area, they increased tremendously to 7,400 square kilometers. Until last year, this was the biggest, mega urban conglomerate. But I think recently Chennai has declared something beyond. I think they went to 8,000 square kilometers. So this is in a way land grab and a change in land use pattern, which again leads to carbon emissions. Now in Hyderabad, master plans are there. At least 7 master plans, and all of them, they push for growth of construction sector. They push for growth of cementing, and then apartment construction. What we have seen earlier, the residential construction. So there is a lot of push towards carbon intensive development. Now, this transit-oriented development, this is a concept which is being pushed by Hyderabad Metro Rail in Hyderabad. So Hyderabad Metro Rail, they built a 71 kilometer, less than 71 kilometer alternative metro rail. So they are not getting, passengers. They said we have built this, planned this for 15 lakh passengers per day, but hardly they are touching 3.5 lakh passengers per day. So now they are changing urban planning in Hyderabad. They are saying you increase the floor area ratio, SFI. So per building we have G+1, G+2, G+3, depending on the area and the road facing, all those parameters. So floor space index or FSI. So now with transit-oriented development, they are saying wherever metro stations are there, you give more space for construction. So that means within the vertical, you can, they want GHMC to allow more number of floors to be added. Now, as it is, the roads are narrow, and in the same area you have 100 tall buildings, and now you want to double it just because there is a metro station. But what about the impact on other services, roads, on wastewater pipelines, then even water supply lines, electricity lines? Everything has to be doubled or tripled based on this transit-oriented development. Now, this is not being questioned, and in planning, they want to intensify the growth just because it responds to the increase in the metro passengers. So I think this kind of topsy-turvy public policies need to be questioned. Now we have a Telangana Energy Conservation Building Code. But as I said, this is not stopping, tall buildings with a glass frontage coming in and around Hyderabad. So what is this building code? Can we read have a relook at it and see if it can be used to reduce carbon emissions. Now, another public policy is recently Telangana brought this Telangana State Building Approval and self-certification. So they're saying to reduce corruption, you issue your own permission, so we don't go through that regulatory process. But then you can see how buildings are increasing just because you have deregulated the whole process, and its impact. Whenever you are deregulating, what is the impact on services? What is the impact on emissions? That assessment has not been done. So number of dwellings are increasing, empty shells are there, resources are wasted, and overall contribution to carbon emissions is not reducing. So what we need to do, just this final slide. One, I think we need to increase the capacity across, different constituencies, students, engineers, architects. I think so. Various sectors they need to understand emissions and whatever they are doing. So we need sustainable cities. When we are talking of cities, sustainable city means it's not about gadgets. Yeah, not smart cities. Sustainable cities is you take care of your wastage and you recycle. So there is a circular economy which needs to be brought into sustainable cities. So say decentralized urban development is very, very required. So in Telangana for long we are saying don't promote Hyderabad. You decentralize, by you can add additional railway track to Mahbub Nagar, additional railway track to Nizamabad, additional railway track to Warangal. So we have this facility. So you enable decentralized urban development that will reduce energy consumption as well. So long-term region-specific development is also in continuation of this sustainable cities and decentralized urban development. So overall, we need to refer to sustainable development goals because it starts with hunger, poverty, education. So all these aspects have been built into sustainable development goals, but we use it as a slogan, but not as a part of our on paper desk-based planning. So it's better we do that and develop SDG indicators so that we monitor the progress towards sustainable development goals. And that is also not happening. So when we are talking of carbon emissions, right from global level to life around us, each of us have to contribute. But who has to contribute more is again because there is sacrifice involved in this. So that sacrifice has to come from the richest and people who have already enjoyed or already enjoying resources disproportionate to their contribution. So I think we need to bring all these elements into energy discussion as well, because usually energy industry and climate change discussions are there. We look at it in silos. I think that should not happen. So we need to link it with the economic development. We need to link it with public policies, and only then we can reduce our emissions. Because right now in Hyderabad, I just last comment in Hyderabad, they say we have 70 lakh vehicles, and the population is almost just 1 crore. But it's not that every household has a vehicle. Only 10% of the people have at least 20-30 lakh vehicles. Sometimes one home has 3 cars, one home has 4 vehicles, 3 motorcycles. So this disproportionate and intensive transport options for only a few people, I think this is not, this cannot continue. There is no sustainability in this. So we need to question this at our level as well, not only at a global level. So we can question US, we can question European Union, how they are polluting the atmosphere through their energy intensive lifestyle. But we also question ourselves at our own level. And we also see this iniquitous resource usage. So I think, I hope I have brought many issues into discussion, and let us have more discussion on that. I'll stop here. Thank you for this patient listening.
There is a question from Mr. Swamajit Mondal. If we do have the right scientific knowledge, technology support, and economic models, none of them will work if we don't have the right policy. So, how strong is the political intent of the state government in this direction, Dr. Garu?
Any singular factor, usually this chicken and egg kind of discussion keeps coming up. So what has to come at what time? So most of us, I'm a political science student, so I can understand this question where political willingness is very, very. Of course, all our politicians, they are profit oriented, income oriented, and they're career oriented. So they don't look at sustainability, and in fact, they are exposed to knowledge or technologies which are anti-emission, anti-sustainability. So number of workshops, whenever you see our ministers or chief minister, they are attending, they are exposed to those technologies which only further this iniquitous situation. So they don't have knowledge of the alternatives. They don't give time also. So simplest answer to you is each has its own factor. Technological factor is there, economic factor is there. So where the money comes from. So which one starts with other one? I'll just give you an example and end it. Telangana government is talking about fecal sludge management. Now, a lot of waste comes in Hyderabad and Nalgonda, any urban city. Raw fecal matter, for a scientist or a person who is treating wastewater, raw fecal matter is a barrier to any cleaning. And why raw fecal matter is coming? Because many of the households, they don't get, piped water supply. So usually they just allow their toilets to flush directly into the nala. So where do we begin here? We have a technology where a fecal sludge management can happen. But then if you just put up a FSM plant, it does not treat the entire wastewater. So you can go to any treatment plant, they bypass all this fecal matter and treat other wastewater. Then what is the purpose, because you have allowed at least 10 to 20% of the wastewater to contaminate water resources. So here we are seeing political will to establish FSM. But the political will is not extending to provide water access for all. If they have done this and that, then you have a complete answer to fecal sludge management. So these kind of gaps are also there, even though somewhere we see political intent, which is very rare, of course, as you rightly pointed out. Politicians, they don't understand all this. They don't want to, they look at capital investment, projects, and cuts they can get out of it. So each aspect, as I mentioned, technological factor, economic factor, O&M factor, political will, and then the pressure from the people themselves, their knowledge. I think all this work out, and wherever all stakeholders have come together, solutions are excellent and they are sustainable.